To save my daughter's promising PR career, I told the police I was behind the wheel. I confessed to the hit and run she committed, trading my freedom for her future. Now I'm inmate #734B, and she's a celebrated star on the red carpet, living a beautiful life built on my lie. She won't even take my prison phone calls. She thinks I'm a secret she has successfully buried. She doesn't know I'm about to issue a press release of my own, and the only thing it will be promoting is her downfall. The count is the first thing and the last thing. It is the steel spine that gives shape to the formless, sagging days inside the Graterford State Correctional Institution for Women. At 5 a.m. the lights flicker on with a harsh, buzzing finality and we stand. We stand at the foot of our narrow bunks, in our identical faded gray uniforms, and we are counted. In the evening after the last lock-in the guards walk the tier again, their footsteps a hollow rhythmic beat against the concrete, and we are counted. It is a twice-daily reminder that you are no longer a person. You are inventory. A number to be tallied, a body to be accounted for in the grim arithmetic of the state. My number is 734B. Before I begin, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. For 38 years of my life, I was a social worker in the city of Philadelphia. My life's work was the opposite of this. It was to see the person behind the number, the story behind the case file. I fought for people who had been rendered invisible by the system. The abused child, the addict, the homeless veteran. I navigated the labyrinthine bureaucracy of the city to find them shelter, to get them help, to remind them that they were still human, that they still mattered. I believed with a deep and abiding faith in the power of intervention, of sacrifice, of standing in the gap for someone who could not stand for themselves. It is the supreme and bitter irony of my life that this very belief is what landed me here. I am in prison for a crime I did not commit. I am here because my daughter, my only child Janelle, made a terrible mistake, and I did what I have always done. I stood in the gap. I took the fall. I confessed to a felony hit and run to save her from this very fate, from becoming a number in a faded gray uniform. I sacrificed my name, my freedom, my remaining years, to preserve her future, a future I believed was bright and limitless. I did it out of love. A fierce, blind, all-consuming mother's love that I now understand is its own kind of prison. Because the real punishment is not the count. It is not the bland, starchy food or the scratchy wool blanket, or the constant grinding noise of hundreds of desperate women packed together in a concrete box. The real punishment is the silence. Every Tuesday and Thursday during our allotted call block, I joined the line of women waiting for the bank of greasy, heavily monitored telephones on the wall. I feed my precious hoarded phone card into the slot, its value earned from my job scrubbing floors in the prison infirmary. I dial the number I know better than my own name, the number that connects to the sleek, expensive smartphone of my daughter, the rising star in the Philadelphia PR world. And every Tuesday and Thursday the result is the same. It rings, a hollow, mocking sound in the cacophony of the day room. It rings 6 times and then it clicks over to her voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Janelle Matthews," her voice says, a sound so smooth and polished and professional it feels like it's being broadcast from another planet. "I'm either on another call or away from my desk. Please leave a detailed message and I'll get back to you at my earliest convenience." She never gets back to me. She won't accept my calls. The letters I write, filled with a mother's desperate, aching need for connection, are returned to the prison mailroom, the envelopes unopened, a single brutal word scrawled across the front in a stranger's hand: refused. She is living her life, the one I saved for her, in her beautiful Center City apartment, going to her glamorous job, climbing the ladder of her ambition. And I am in here, a ghost in her past that she is trying to exorcise through sheer willful neglect. She thought my sacrifice was a transaction, a one-time payment to make her problems disappear. She thought she could take my life and discard the person who gave it to her. She does not know her mother. She does not know the woman who taught her how to fight. I may be a number here, but I am not invisible. And I am about to remind my daughter that every debt, eventually, comes due. The count is how my day begins. But the reckoning is how this story will end. The night the lie was born, it was raining. A cold, miserable November rain that slicked the streets of Philadelphia and blurred the city lights into a watercolor of despair. I was in my small warm row house in West Oak Lane, the house I had shared with my late husband Robert, the house where I had raised Janelle. I was in my favorite armchair, a cup of chamomile tea in my hands, reading a novel. The quiet hum of the old radiator and the gentle patter of rain against the windowpane were the only sounds. It was a scene of perfect, settled peace. And then the phone rang, shattering the quiet like a thrown stone. It was just after 1 a.m. A call at that hour is never good news. My heart seized with a familiar, maternal panic. I snatched the phone from its cradle. Janelle. Mama. Her voice was a high, thin wire of hysteria, stretched to its breaking point. It was a sound I hadn't heard since she was a child who had woken from a nightmare. She was sobbing, a desperate, gasping sound that was punctuated by the frantic whoosh of her own breathing. Janelle, honey, what is it? What's wrong? Where are you? I was already on my feet, my mind racing through a Rolodex of potential catastrophes. I messed up, Mama, she wailed, her voice dissolving into another torrent of sobs. Oh God, I messed up so bad. My life is over. It's over. Nothing is over, I said, my voice a calm, steady anchor in her storm. It was the voice I had used for 38 years as a social worker, the voice that talked people down from ledges, literal and metaphorical. Just tell me what happened. Tell me where you are. The story came tumbling out in a chaotic, fragmented rush. She had been at a work event, a dinner at a fancy restaurant in Old City. It was important. A major new client, a tech company, was in town, and her boss had tasked her with showing them a good time. The good time had involved multiple bottles of expensive wine. She was trying to impress them, to show them she was a player that she could hang. After the dinner, she had offered to drive the client back to his hotel. It was a stupid, reckless decision. She knew it was. But she wanted to seal the deal, to be the hero. She was driving down a poorly lit street near the waterfront. It was raining hard. She was looking at her GPS just for a second. And then there was a thud. A horrible, sickening thud. She screamed. She slammed on the brakes. She saw something. A shape. A person lying on the wet asphalt in her rearview mirror. Did you stop? I asked, my own heart hammering against my ribs. Janelle, please tell me you stopped. No, she shrieked, her voice cracking with terror. I couldn't. I panicked. The client was in the car, Mama. He saw everything. I drove. I drove away. I dropped him at his hotel and I drove home. Oh God, Mama, what am I going to do? They'll find me. The car is damaged. The police. My job. My whole life, it's gone. I sank back into my armchair, the phone pressed hard against my ear. My mind, trained for crisis, was working with a cold, terrifying clarity. A hit and run. A felony. With a witness. My daughter, my brilliant, ambitious, beautiful daughter, the one for whom I had sacrificed everything, was about to be swallowed whole by the system. I saw it all in a horrifying, instantaneous flash. The arrest, the mug shot, the trial, the prison sentence. Her bright future, the one Robert and I had dreamed of, the one I had nurtured and protected since the day she was born, was about to be extinguished. And in that moment, a lifetime of maternal instinct, of protective love so fierce it bordered on madness, coalesced into a single catastrophic decision. It was not even a choice. It felt like a biological imperative, like a mother lion throwing herself in front of a hunter's spear to save her cub. There was no debate. There was no weighing of options. There was only the lie. Listen to me, Janelle, I said, my voice low, firm, and absolute. Listen to me very carefully. You're going to hang up this phone. You're going to go to bed. You are not going to talk to anyone. Not the client. Not your friends. No one. Do you understand? But the car, she stammered. We will deal with the car later, I said. Right now, you are going to do exactly as I say. You were home all night. You felt ill after work and you came straight home. You lent your car to me. I needed to run to the all-night pharmacy. Do you understand me, Janelle? There was a pause on the other end of the line, a silence filled with the dawning, horrified understanding of what I was offering. Mama, she whispered, her voice a thread of disbelief. No, you can't. I can, I said. And I will. I am your mother. It is my job to protect you. It was the truest and most foolish sentence I have ever spoken. They'll send you to prison, she sobbed, but her protest was weak, already being consumed by the powerful, seductive tide of self-preservation. I'm an old woman, Janelle, I said, the lie now fully formed, a living, breathing entity in the room with me. My life is mostly behind me. Yours is just beginning. They will be lenient with me. A first offense. My age. It will be a slap on the wrist. But for you, it would be the end of everything. I gave her no more time to argue. I gave her no time for her conscience to find its voice. Go to bed, honey, I whispered. Mama will handle it. I've always handled it. I hung up the phone. I stood in the center of my quiet, peaceful living room, the sanctuary of my life, and I felt the walls begin to close in. I walked to my bedroom, my movements stiff and automatic. I put on a coat. I found my car keys. I did not look in the mirror. I knew I would not recognize the woman I saw there. I walked out of my home and into the cold, cleansing rain. I drove to the nearest police precinct, the 14th district on Haynes Street. The building was old and smelled of stale coffee and despair. I walked up to the desk sergeant, a tired-looking man with a face like a crumpled paper bag. I need to report an accident, I said, my voice a calm, steady, and monstrous falsehood. I was driving tonight and I think I hit someone. The lie was told. The choice was made. And the rest of my life, the life I had so willingly thrown away, began to unspool before me. The first few weeks inside are a blur of disorientation, a sensory assault designed to strip you of your identity. The clang of steel doors, the shouting of orders, the constant, inescapable proximity of other people's bodies, other people's desperation. It's a shock to the system from which you never fully recover. But you learn the rhythm. You learn to keep your head down, your mouth shut, and your eyes open. You learn the currency of the place, which is not money but cigarettes, postage stamps, and phone card minutes. Especially the phone card minutes. The phone card is your lifeline, your umbilical cord to the world you left behind. It is the most valuable thing you can possess. You earn it through mind-numbing, back-breaking labor. My job as one of the new fish was on the sanitation crew for the medical wing. For 4 hours a day I was on my hands and knees, scrubbing floors sticky with things I tried not to identify, cleaning toilets that had seen decades of human misery. I am 64 years old. My knees ache with an arthritis that flares in the damp, cold air of the prison. My back is a constant screaming knot of pain. But I did the work without complaint. I did it because at the end of the week I was credited with a few dollars on my commissary account, enough to buy a book of stamps and a 120-minute phone card. Those 120 minutes were my reason for living. They were the reason I endured the humiliation, the pain, the fear. They were my connection to Janelle. In those first few weeks I clung to the lie I had told myself. I believed that Janelle's silence was a form of protection. She was scared. She was traumatized. She was following my instructions to lay low, to not draw any attention to herself. Her refusal to answer my calls was a sign of her obedience, of her fear of being caught. I told myself this story over and over again, a mantra to get me through the long, terrifying nights. She loves me. She's just scared. The phone calls were a ritual of hope and despair. The phones are located in the main day room, a vast, cavernous space with concrete walls that echo with the noise of 100 simultaneous conversations, the blare of a television that is never turned off, and the occasional sudden eruption of violence. There is no privacy. You stand in a long, slow-moving line of women, each one clutching her own desperate need for connection. You learn to block out the noise. You learn to create a small, imaginary bubble of privacy around yourself. When my turn would come, my heart would hammer in my chest. I would punch in my PIN, then Janelle's number, my fingers clumsy with a mixture of hope and dread. And then I would listen. Ring. Please pick up, baby. Ring. Please let me hear your voice. Ring. I just need to know you're okay. Ring. The hope would begin to curdle into a familiar, sour anxiety. Ring. Why isn't she answering? Ring. And then the click. The final devastating click. Hi, you've reached Janelle Matthews. Her voice, so polished and professional, was a slap in the face. It was the voice of a stranger, a successful, busy woman who did not have time for a collect call from a state correctional institution. I would never leave a message. The calls were monitored. What could I possibly say? Hello, darling, just calling from the prison cell I'm occupying for the felony you committed. Hope you're having a lovely week. So I would hang up, my 120 minutes now 119, the loss of that single minute feeling like a physical blow. I would walk back to my cell, the bubble of hope popped, leaving behind only the cold, sticky residue of despair. The letters were even worse. I would spend hours on them, sitting on my bunk, a flimsy plastic pen in my hand, a pad of cheap lined paper on my knee. I would pour my heart out onto those pages. I told her I was okay, another lie in a mountain of them. I told her not to worry. I told her I loved her. I filled the pages with memories of her childhood, of trips to the shore, of her first day of school, of the fierce, boundless pride I had always felt for her. I was trying to remind her of the bond we shared, the history that connected us. I was trying to remind her that I was her mother. I would fold the letters, slide them into a stamped envelope and drop them into the outgoing mail slot, a small act of faith. And then, a week or two later, the letter would reappear in my cell, delivered by a guard with a look of pitying contempt. The envelope would be creased and dirty from its journey, my own handwriting looking back at me like an accusation. And scrawled across the front, always in the same impersonal block letters, would be the word, refused. She wouldn't even open them. She wouldn't even grant me the dignity of reading my words before rejecting them. The refusal was a conscious act. It was a message. It was a wall being built, brick by brick, with every unanswered call, every returned letter. The other women in my cell block saw it. They saw the hope on my face when I went to the phones, and they saw the crushing disappointment when I returned. They saw the returned letters on my bunk. They were kind in their own rough way. "Don't you worry, Mama B," a young woman named Sasha in for check fraud told me once. "Kids are stupid. She'll come around." But as the weeks turned into months, the hope began to die. The story I told myself about her being scared started to fray at the edges, revealing a darker, more terrifying truth beneath it. This was not fear. This was not obedience. This was abandonment. I had stepped in front of a bus for her, and she had not only let it hit me, she had walked away from the scene of the accident without a backward glance. The silence was not a shield to protect her. It was a cage to imprison me, a second prison of loneliness and despair, far more brutal than the one made of concrete and steel. And the worst part, the part that gnawed at me in the dead of night, was the slow dawning realization that I had built this cage myself, out of my own blind, stupid love. In prison, television is both a blessing and a curse. It is a window to the outside world, a mindless distraction from the suffocating monotony of the daily routine. But it is also a constant taunting reminder of the life you have lost, of the freedom you no longer possess. The dayroom TV is always on, its volume cranked to a deafening level, its channel dictated by a complex and ever-shifting hierarchy of inmate power. Usually it's tuned to daytime talk shows, soap operas, or sports. But on this particular afternoon, it was tuned to an entertainment news program, a show dedicated to the glittering, meaningless lives of celebrities. I rarely paid attention. I would usually sit in a corner of the dayroom during our rec time, trying to read a tattered paperback from the prison library, the noise of the TV a dull roar in the background. But something on this day made me look up. It was a voice. A familiar, professionally cheerful voice from the television announcer. "And the stars are out in full force tonight at the Philadelphia Public Relations Society's annual Vision and Voice Awards Gala, celebrating the best and brightest in the city's PR world." My head snapped up. My heart gave a painful lurch. The screen was filled with images of beautifully dressed people posing on a red carpet, a backdrop behind them covered in corporate logos. And then the camera zoomed in on a single figure. It was Janelle. She was breathtaking. She was wearing a shimmering emerald green gown that clung to her like a second skin. Her hair was swept up in an elegant style, and diamonds glittered at her ears and throat. She was smiling, a wide, confident, incandescent smile, the kind of smile that could sell anything to anyone. She looked happy. She looked successful. She looked utterly, completely, and damnably free. She was being interviewed by a woman holding a microphone. "Janelle Matthews," the interviewer chirped. "You are the name on everyone's lips tonight. Your campaign for the new tech giant, Omnicorp, has been a massive success. How does it feel to be one of the most sought-after PR mavens in the city?" Janelle laughed, a light, tinkling sound that I could hear even over the din of the dayroom. "It's been a whirlwind," she said, her voice the epitome of practiced, professional humility. "But I have an amazing team. And honestly, I'm just so grateful for the opportunities I've been given. It's all about looking forward, staying positive, and never letting anything hold you back. Never letting anything hold you back." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I felt the air leave my lungs. I was her anything. I was the thing she had refused to let hold her back. I was the secret, the obstacle, the dirty little problem she had solved by locking it away in a concrete box and throwing away the key. The camera panned down and a caption appeared at the bottom of the screen, beneath my daughter's radiant, smiling face. It read, "Janelle Matthews, PR star on the rise." The dayroom, for a moment, seemed to fall silent. Or perhaps it was just the roaring in my own ears that drowned everything else out. I was frozen, my eyes glued to the screen, my paperback forgotten in my lap. I was a ghost at my own daughter's coronation. The life she was being celebrated for, the success she was so gracefully accepting, was a lie. It was a shimmering, beautiful, emerald green lie, and it was built on the foundation of my imprisonment. The Omnicorp client she had so successfully landed was the same man who had been in the car with her on the night of the accident. She hadn't just gotten away with it. She had profited from it. She had turned the very event that should have destroyed her career into a stepping stone for her greatest triumph. And then, the moment was shattered by a voice from beside me. "Hey, isn't that your kid, Mama B?" It was Sasha, the young woman from my cell block. She was pointing at the screen, a look of genuine confusion on her face. A few other women turned to look, their interest piqued. They had all heard my side of the story, the lie I had been telling them and myself. They knew I was in here for a hit and run. They knew I had a daughter on the outside. But the daughter I had described to them was a grieving, terrified young woman, not this glittering, triumphant creature on the television screen. "Yeah," another woman chimed in, her voice laced with a dawning, suspicious curiosity. "That's her, ain't it? Damn. She clean up good." The whisper started then. A low, venomous murmur that spread through the dayroom like a virus. The looks I received were no longer looks of pity. They were looks of contempt, of suspicion, of a dawning, ugly understanding. These women were experts in the art of the lie, the con, the hustle. They could smell a fabrication a mile away. And the story I had been telling them, the story of the loving mother taking the blame for a tragic accident, suddenly smelled very, very wrong. They looked at the radiant, successful woman on the screen, and then they looked at me, a gray, tired 64-year-old woman in a prison uniform, scrubbing toilets for a living. And they did the math. The equation was simple, brutal, and obvious. I felt my face flush with a hot, profound, and unbearable shame. It was a humiliation more acute than any I had experienced since my arrival. My lie had not just been exposed to me, it had been exposed to my entire world. I was not just a prisoner. I was a fool. A dupe. The oldest, saddest story in the book. The loving mother played for a sucker by her own ungrateful child. I stood up, my legs trembling, and walked out of the dayroom. I did not run. I walked with as much dignity as I could muster, the whispers and the snickers following me like a physical assault. I went back to my cell, lay down on my hard, thin mattress and stared at the gray concrete ceiling. The image of Janelle's smiling face was burned onto the back of my eyelids. The lie I had built to protect her had crumbled, and in its place was a truth so cold and so hard it felt like it could stop my heart. My sacrifice had not been a gift. It had been an opportunity, and she had seized it with both hands. The ghost of Janelle's gala haunted the cell block. Her televised triumph became a part of my prison identity, a story told in hushed, mocking tones whenever I walked by. I was no longer just 734B. I was Mama PR, the old fool whose daughter was living it up on the outside while she rotted on the inside. The thin veneer of community I had managed to build, the small kindnesses exchanged with other women, all of it evaporated. I was an outcast, a pariah. The pity they had once shown me had curdled into a corrosive contempt. In the brutal social ecosystem of prison, there is no lower status than that of the willing victim, the chump who let herself be played. My days became a study in isolation. I ate my meals alone, my eyes fixed on my tray, the chatter and laughter of the other women at the long metal tables a wall of sound I could not penetrate. During rec time in the yard, a bleak, fenced-in patch of cracked asphalt, I would walk the perimeter by myself, my head down, tracing the same monotonous circle again and again. The yard, which had once been a brief respite from the claustrophobia of the cell, now felt like a stage where my humiliation was on public display. The work in the infirmary, once a source of pride and a means to earn my precious phone card minutes, became an exercise in pure physical misery. The smell of antiseptic and sickness seemed to seep into my skin. My body, already protesting the strain of the labor, began to break down in earnest. The ache in my knees became a sharp, stabbing pain with every bend. The knot in my back tightened until it felt like a ball of hot iron. But the physical pain was nothing compared to the emotional agony. My mind, with nothing else to occupy it, turned on itself. It became a torture chamber, replaying the events of the past few months on an endless, brutal loop. I saw Janelle's hysterical face on the night of the phone call, her tears not of remorse but of pure, selfish terror. I saw my own foolish, resolute face as I walked into the police precinct, so sure I was doing the right noble thing. I saw the returned letters, the word refused, like a brand on my heart. And over again I saw her on that television screen, her emerald dress, her glittering diamonds, her radiant, triumphant smile. That smile was the cruelest cut of all. It was the smile of a person who had not just escaped consequences, but had profited from them. She was not just surviving, she was thriving. My imprisonment was not a tragic necessity she was enduring. It was the secret ingredient to her success, the dark fuel for her bright, rising star. The thought was a poison, and it was killing me from the inside out. Sleep, my only previous escape, became a place of torment. I was plagued by nightmares. In one, I was at the bottom of a deep, dark well, my hands raw from trying to claw my way up the slick stone walls. I could hear Janelle's laughter echoing from the top, a light, tinkling sound that grew fainter and fainter as she walked away. In another, I was at her awards gala, but I was invisible, a ghost weaving through the crowd trying to get her attention, but she looked right through me, her eyes as cold and empty as a winter sky. I would wake up in the pre-dawn darkness of my cell, my heart pounding, my thin mattress soaked with a cold sweat, the despair of physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The breaking point came on a gray, drizzly afternoon in the yard. I was walking my usual solitary circle, my head bowed against the wind, when a group of younger inmates, led by a woman with a hard, cruel face, blocked my path. Well, if it ain't Mama Pierre, the leader sneered, her voice loud enough for everyone in the yard to hear. How's your famous daughter doing? She buy a new mansion with all the money she's saving on your room and board. Her friends cackled, a harsh, ugly sound. I tried to walk around them, my eyes fixed on the ground. Leave me alone, I mumbled. What's that? The woman said, stepping in front of me again. We can't hear you. You gotta speak up. Your daughter can't hear you all the way from her penthouse apartment. Something inside me, a cord that had been stretched taut for months, finally snapped. It was not anger. It was not rage. It was a profound and total emptiness, a sense of futility so complete it felt like the world was tilting on its axis. I repeated, my voice a dead, hollow whisper, leave me alone. And then my legs simply gave out. It was as if the strings holding me upright had been cut. I crumpled to the wet, gritty asphalt, the impact jarring my already aching bones. I didn't try to get up. I just lay there, the cold rain beginning to soak through my thin uniform, my face pressed against the rough, unforgiving ground. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in my life I gave up. I was done. I was done fighting, done hoping, done trying to make sense of a world that had ceased to have any. This was my life now, a joke, a cautionary tale, a slow, lonely death in a cage, then so be it. The guards' whistles blew, a shrill, panicked sound. I could hear their heavy boots running towards me. But I didn't move. I just lay on the ground, in the rain, in the center of the prison yard, and I waited for the darkness to take me. I had hit rock bottom. And the only thing I felt was a profound and almost peaceful sense of relief that the struggle was finally over. I didn't end up in the infirmary. I ended up in the library. After the guards had hauled me to my feet and determined I wasn't physically injured, just emotionally shattered, they had taken me to the one place in Greaterford that passed for a sanctuary. The prison library was a small, stuffy room on the second floor of the administration building, but it was quiet. The shelves were lined with donated books, their spines cracked and their pages soft with use. The air smelled of old paper and floor wax, a scent that for me was the smell of sanity. And sitting behind a small, cluttered desk like a queen on her throne was Mama Rose. Rose was a legend in Greaterford. She was in her late 60s, a lifer who had been inside for more than 30 years. She had a face like a magnificent ancient tree, carved with the lines of a long and difficult life, but her eyes were as sharp and clear as a hawk's. She ran the library with an iron fist and a quiet, unshakable authority. No one messed with Mama Rose. She had seen everything, heard every story, and she possessed a bullshit detector that was second to none. She had been the one to request I be brought to her. She had seen my collapse in the yard from her window. She sat now, watching me as I huddled in a hard plastic chair, my body still trembling with a delayed, shivering shock. She didn't speak for a long time. She just let me sit in the quiet, letting the silence work its own kind of medicine. Finally, she spoke, her voice a low, gravelly rumble that was surprisingly gentle. "I know your story, Brenda," she said, not looking at me, but at a book she was mending with a piece of tape. "Or rather, I know the story you told yourself." I didn't answer. I just stared at my hands, which were clasped tightly in my lap. "I see it all the time," she continued, her voice a calm, steady rhythm. "Good women, loving mothers, who think they're performing some great, noble sacrifice for their children. They come in here, chests puffed out, ready to do their time, proud of the bullet they took." She looked up then, and her sharp eyes pinned me to my chair. "But you didn't take a bullet for her, honey. That's the part you got wrong. All you did was hand her the gun, show her how to use it, and prove to her that she could get away with murder. You didn't save her. You crippled her." The words were brutal, but they were also true. They cut through the fog of my self-pity and my grief with the clean, sharp edge of a surgeon's scalpel. "You taught her the wrong lesson," Rose went on, her voice softening slightly. "You taught her that love means there are no consequences. You taught her that her actions don't matter because her mother will always be there to clean up the mess. You think you're in here for a hit and run? No. You're in here for loving your daughter more than you loved yourself. And that, right there, is the most dangerous crime a woman can commit." A single hot tear escaped my eye and traced a path down my cheek. It was the first tear I had shed since the night of my arrest. "So now," Rose said, leaning forward, her gaze intense, "you have a choice. You can stay on that yard feeling sorry for yourself and let that girl bury you. You can let her dance on your grave at her fancy parties and live her beautiful, empty life, while you fade away into nothing in this place. You can become another sad story that the new fish whisper about. Or, you can start digging." "Digging," I whispered, my voice hoarse. "Digging your way out," she said, a fierce, powerful light coming into her eyes. "I'm not talking about a tunnel with a spoon, Brenda. I'm talking about your mind. I'm talking about your spirit. You're a smart woman. I've seen your file. A social worker. You fought for other people your whole life. When was the last time you fought for yourself?" She stood up and walked over to a shelf. She pulled down a thick, heavy book. It was a book of law, a legal code for the state of Pennsylvania. She dropped it on the desk in front of me with a heavy, definitive thud. "Your daughter built her freedom on your silence," she said. "She built her success on your suffering. She thinks she's safe because you're in here, locked away, a ghost she can ignore. What do you think would happen if that ghost started to talk? What do you think would happen if that ghost learned how to fight back?" She tapped the law book with a long, elegant finger. "This place, this library, this is a university for the wronged woman, Brenda. You can learn a lot in here if you're willing to be a student. You can learn about the law. You can learn about strategy. You can learn how to turn your weakness into a weapon." She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "She took your life from you. The question is, are you going to let her keep it? Or are you going to make her give it back?" I looked from her powerful, challenging face to the law book on the desk. A flicker of something I hadn't felt in a very long time, a feeling I thought had died in me, began to stir. It was a tiny, fragile ember, but it was there. It was anger. It was resolve. It was the first faint stirring of a fight. Mama Rose saw it in my eyes. She smiled, a slow, knowing, and deeply satisfied smile. "Good," she said, walking back to her desk. "Class is now in session. Your first assignment is to stop crying and start reading. And your second assignment is to stop calling your daughter. The next call you make is going to be to your lawyer." The librarian had given me a new curriculum. The subject was justice. And for the first time since I had walked through the gates of Greaterford, I was ready to learn. The library became my world. Under Mama Rose's tutelage, I transformed. The despair that had been a constant, heavy cloak on my shoulders began to lift, replaced by a cold, clear, and unfamiliar sense of purpose. I was no longer a victim. I was a student, and my major was my own exoneration. I attacked the law books with the same methodical intensity one had once applied to my social work cases. I spent every spare moment in that quiet, dusty room, poring over legal texts, my brow furrowed in concentration. I learned about legal precedent, about the rules of evidence, about the appeals process. I learned the language of the system that had imprisoned me, and with every new term I mastered, I felt a small piece of my power returning. But Rose was right. Knowledge was only one part of the equation. I needed a conduit to the outside world. I needed an agent who could act on the strategies we were beginning to formulate. I needed to make a call. But not to Janelle. The thought of dialing her number now filled me with a kind of weary disgust. My first act of defiance, my first step out of the grave I had dug for myself, would be to reach out to the one person in the legal system who had shown even a flicker of doubt about my case. I needed to talk to David Chin. David Chin had been my court-appointed public defender. He was a young man barely older than Janelle, with tired, perpetually haunted eyes and a rumpled suit that looked like he had slept in it. During my brief and perfunctory trial, he had been overworked and distracted, dealing with a dozen other cases far more complex than mine. My case had been an easy one for him, a quick, clean confession, a slam dunk for the prosecution. But I remembered a moment just before my sentencing, when he had looked at me with a strange, searching expression. "Are you absolutely sure about this, Ms. Matthews?" he had asked, his voice low. "You've never been in trouble a day in your life. You have a spotless record, a lifetime of community service. This story, it just doesn't track. If there's anything else you want to tell me, now is the time." I had looked him in the eye and lied, my voice firm. "I have told you the truth, Mr. Chin. I am guilty. I am ready to accept the consequences." He had sighed, a sound of deep, weary resignation, and had not pushed further. But the memory of his doubt, that small, unprofessional flicker of curiosity, had stayed with me. He was my only hope. Getting a meeting with an outside lawyer from inside prison is not a simple task. It involves forms, requests, and a bureaucratic process designed to discourage you at every turn. But with Rose's guidance, I navigated it. I filled out the official request form for legal counsel. In the section for reason for request, I did not write, "My daughter framed me." I wrote, as Rose had instructed, to discuss potential grounds for appeal based on new information regarding my case. It was formal. It was professional. It was a language the system understood. I submitted the form and then I waited. For 2 weeks I heard nothing. The old despair began to knock at the door of my newfound resolve. Maybe he wouldn't come. Maybe he had forgotten all about me, just another closed case in a mountain of them. But then one morning during the mail call, a guard stopped at my cell. "Matthews," he said, a note of surprise in his voice. "You have a legal visit. 10 o'clock. Be ready." My heart leaped. He was coming. The first shovel had struck solid ground. At 10 o'clock I was escorted to the visitor's room, a sterile, grim space divided by a thick pane of scratched plexiglass. And there he was, sitting on the other side, looking just as tired and rumpled as I remembered. He had a file open in front of him, my file, and he was looking at it with a frown of deep concentration. He looked up as I entered and sat down on the hard plastic stool. "Ms. Matthews," he said, his voice flat, professional. "I have to be honest, I was surprised to get your request. Your case is closed. You pled guilty. The window for a direct appeal is long gone." "I know that, Mr. Chin," I said, my voice steady. I had rehearsed this moment 100 times with Rose. "I'm not here to talk about a standard appeal. I'm here to tell you that my confession was a lie." He leaned back, a flicker of something, interest, vindication, in his tired eyes. He didn't look shocked. He looked like a man who was finally hearing the answer to a question that had been bothering him for a long time. "Okay," he said slowly. "I'm listening." And so I told him. I didn't tell him the whole truth, not yet. Rose had been adamant about that. You don't show your whole hand at once. You build trust. You provide just enough to ignite their curiosity, to make them a partner in the investigation. I didn't mention Janelle by name. I spoke in hypotheticals, in carefully chosen, legally cautious language. "Let's imagine," I began, "that a person I care about very deeply was the one driving that car. Let's imagine that this person had a bright future, a promising career, and that a felony conviction would have destroyed their life. And let's imagine that I, a person whose life was mostly behind her, made a decision to protect them." I watched his face as I spoke. He was leaning forward now, his elbows on the narrow counter, his eyes fixed on mine. He was no longer a tired public defender. He was an investigator who had just caught the scent of a story. And let's further imagine, I continued, that I have come to believe that this decision was a grave mistake. That my sacrifice has been unappreciated. That the person I sought to protect is not the person I thought they were. I let the words hang in the air between us. I had laid the bait. Now I had to see if he would take it. He was silent for a full minute, his gaze searching my face. He was assessing my credibility, my motivation. He was weighing the immense professional risk of reopening a closed case against the tantalizing possibility of correcting a profound injustice. Finally he spoke. "This person you're talking about," he said, his voice low and careful. "This person you protected. Do you have a name?" "I might," I said, giving him the answer Rose and I had so carefully crafted. "But a name is just a word. It's not evidence. And I imagine that a good lawyer, if he were sufficiently motivated, could find the evidence to support that name. I imagine that a good lawyer might start by looking at the original police report, at the witness statement from the passenger in the car. He might wonder why that passenger was never properly interviewed. He might wonder a lot of things. I had given him a thread. A small, tantalizing thread to pull on. David Chen closed my file. He looked at me and for the first time I saw not a public defender but a man with a fire in his belly. A man who had gone into law not just for a paycheck but because he believed in justice. "Okay, Ms. Matthews," he said, a new sharp edge to his voice. "Hey, let's imagine I start wondering about those things. You have my attention. Let me do some digging. I'll be in touch." The visit was over. As the guards led me back to my cell block, I felt a sense of triumph so pure and so powerful it was almost dizzying. I had done it. I had taken the first, most difficult step. I had turned my silent, solitary suffering into a concrete plan of action. I had found my voice. And more importantly, I had found my lawyer. The first shovel had been plunged into the earth. The long, slow, and difficult process of digging my way out had officially begun. David Chen walked out of Graterford State Correctional Institution feeling a way he hadn't felt in years. The usual sense of weary resignation that accompanied his prison visits was gone, replaced by a thrumming electric current of professional indignation and intellectual curiosity. The Brenda Matthews case had always been a small, persistent burr under the saddle of his conscience. In the triage-driven world of the public defender's office, where you were constantly drowning in a sea of hopeless cases and impossible odds, you learned to triage your emotional energy. You focused on the fights you had a prayer of winning, and you processed the open and shut cases like a factory worker on an assembly line. Brenda Matthews should have been an easy one. A clean confession, a remorseful defendant, a straightforward plea deal. Case closed. But it had never felt clean. David remembered the initial consultation in the holding cell. He had expected to meet a hardened criminal or a panicked, hysterical woman. Instead, he had found a 64-year-old retired social worker with the calm, steady eyes of a person who had spent a lifetime looking into the abyss of human suffering without flinching. Her confession was too smooth, too practiced. There was no panic, no confusion, none of the usual tells of a person reeling from a traumatic event. She had recited the facts of the hit and run with the detached air of a witness, not a perpetrator. It was the performance of a lie, and even then a small warning bell had rung in the back of his mind. He had tried to push her gently. "Ms. Matthews, an accident like this. People are usually distraught. You seem very composed." She had looked at him with those unervingly calm eyes and said, "I have had a long time to think about my actions, Mr. Chen. I am ready to face the music." He had let it go. He had a dozen other clients that day, men and women whose guilt was not in question, whose lives were actively unraveling in ways that demanded his immediate attention. He had done his job, negotiated a plea for the minimum sentence and filed the case away. But it had haunted him. It was a loose thread in the tightly woven fabric of his professional life, a small, nagging question mark in a world that demanded certainty. Now, sitting in his beat-up sedan in the prison parking lot, the file for case number C78943, Commonwealth vs. Matthews, open on the passenger seat, the question mark was blooming into a full-blown investigation. Her words from their meeting echoed in his head. Let's imagine that a person I care about very deeply, was the one driving that car. He knew with a certainty that settled deep in his gut, that he was on the verge of uncovering a profound injustice. This was the kind of case that lawyers dreamed of, The kind that reminded you why you had gone to law school in the first place. It wasn't about the money or the prestige. It was about the truth. Back in his cluttered, shoebox-sized office in the Defender Association building, surrounded by teetering stacks of files, David began to dig. He started, as Brenda had suggested, with the original police report. It was a thin, perfunctory document. It detailed Brenda's walk-in confession, her statement, and the location of the accident. He found the section on the witness. The passenger. His name was listed as Mr. Evan Prescott, a visiting executive from a company called Omnicorp. The report stated that Mr. Prescott had corroborated the basic facts of the accident but had been shaken, and had left the city the next morning on a pre-scheduled flight. There was no detailed follow-up interview. No sworn statement taken after the initial shock had worn off. It was a loose end. A big one. David's mind began to race. Why wouldn't the police have secured a more detailed statement from the only eyewitness? Unless, perhaps, the person who was actually driving that night had a vested interest in making sure Mr. Prescott disappeared as quickly and quietly as possible. He turned his attention to Brenda's background check. It was, as he remembered, pristine. Not just clean but actively virtuous. Decades of service as a social worker. Commendations from the city. Glowing letters from colleagues. It was the life story of a saint, not a felon. And then he looked at her family details. Widow. 1 child. A daughter. Janelle Matthews. Age 28. He opened a new tab on his computer and typed the name, Janelle Matthews, into a search engine. The results flooded his screen. He saw the glossy headshots of a beautiful, ambitious young woman. He saw press releases from a high-powered PR firm. He saw articles praising her work, her talent, her meteoric rise. And then he saw it. An article from a Philadelphia Society blog, dated just a few months ago, detailing the PR Society's Vision and Voice Awards Gala. The article gushed about the city's brightest stars, and it featured a large, glamorous photo of Janelle on the red carpet, accepting an award for her brilliant campaign for a new client, a tech giant named Omnicorp. David leaned back in his chair, a low whistle escaping his lips. The pieces were clicking into place with a sickening, beautiful logic. The witness in the car, Evan Prescott, worked for Omnicorp. The client Janelle had just landed, the one that was making her a star, was Omnicorp. It was all connected. Janelle hadn't just let her mother take the fall. She had leveraged the silence she'd bought with her mother's freedom to build her own career. It was a level of cold, calculated ruthlessness that was almost breathtaking. He felt a surge of protective fury on behalf of his client, the quiet, dignified woman sitting in a prison cell 60 miles away. Brenda Matthews was not just a case number anymore. He was a cause. He had been her haunted defender. Now he was about to become her avenging angel. He picked up his phone. His first call was not to the police. They would be defensive, unwilling to admit they had botched an investigation. His first call was to a private investigator he knew, a grizzled ex-cop named Sal who owed him a favor. "Sal," he said, his voice tight with a new, unfamiliar excitement. "I've got something for you. A hit-and-run case from last year. I want you to find me an eyewitness. A guy named Evan Prescott works for a company called Omnicorp. And while you're at it, I want you to find out everything you can about a PR maven named Janelle Matthews. Specifically, I'm interested in her car. Any recent repairs? Any body work done around, say, last November?" He hung up the phone, his heart pounding. The hunt was on. He was no longer just a public defender, a cog in the machine. He was an investigator, a truth seeker, a man with a mission. Brenda had given him the thread. And he was going to pull on it until the entire, ugly tapestry of Janelle's lies unraveled completely. The prison library, once my sanctuary, transformed into my war room. It was a clandestine operation, run under the watchful, approving eye of Mama Rose. Our strategy sessions took place in hushed tones over the library's large, scarred wooden table, ostensibly while we were mending books or recataloguing the collection. To any passing guard, we were just two old women engaged in quiet, tedious library work. In reality, we were plotting a revolution. Rose was the general, the master strategist. Her 30 years inside had given her a PhD in human nature, especially its darker, more manipulative aspects. She understood the psychology of the con, the motivations of the user, the delicate art of applying pressure until a lie cracks. She saw Janelle not as my daughter but as an opponent, a mark. and she approached the task of dismantling her with the detached clinical precision of a chess master. You cannot fight her on the battlefield of emotion, Rose told me during one of our first sessions, her voice a low, conspiratorial rumble. That is her territory. She knows how to manipulate your love, your guilt. She will cry, she will apologize, she will make you feel like you are the one who is being cruel. That is a game you will always lose. So what do we do? I asked, my pen poised over a legal pad where I was taking notes. You fight her on the battlefield she has chosen, Rose said, a grim smile playing on her lips. Public relations. Image. Reputation. That is her God. That is the altar at which she worships. And so, that is the altar we are going to desecrate. My role was to be the intelligence officer. I was the one with the deep, intimate knowledge of the enemy. I spent hours with Rose, excavating my own memories, not for sentiment but for tactical information. I told her everything about Janelle, her ambitions, her insecurities, her friends, her professional rivals. I was a living, breathing dossier on my own daughter. Who is her biggest competitor at the firm? Rose would ask, her sharp eyes missing nothing. A woman named Chloe, I'd reply. Janelle always said Chloe was ruthless, that she would do anything to get ahead. Good, Rose would nod. Chloe is a potential asset. We file her name away. What about her boss? The head of the agency. Mr. Davenport. Old school. Cares deeply about the firm's reputation. He's terrified of any kind of scandal. Excellent, Rose would say. Mr. Davenport is the pressure point. We made lists. Lists of Janelle's colleagues. Lists of her clients. Lists of the society reporters and gossip columnists she was so desperate to impress. We were mapping her world, identifying its fault lines, its vulnerabilities. It was a strange and painful process, turning my maternal knowledge into a weapon. Every memory, every anecdote was now assessed for its tactical value. The story of Janelle's desperate desire to get into the right social clubs in college was no longer a mother's fond memory. It was evidence of her deep-seated insecurity and obsession with status. The time she had thrown a tantrum because I had bought her the wrong brand of handbag was not a sign of youthful foolishness. It was a data point on her profound materialism. I was deconstructing my own daughter, stripping away the emotional connection and seeing her for the first time as a case study. And the case study was damning. Our war room was not just about strategy. It was about my own re-education. Rose was not just my general, she was my drill sergeant. She was hardening me, preparing me for the fight to come. She would test me, challenge me. He's going to find evidence, she said one afternoon, referring to David Chin. And when he does, he's going to want you to go to the authorities. What are you going to do? I'll tell them the truth, I said. Wrong, she snapped. The truth is your last resort. It's the card you play only when all other cards have been dealt. The moment you become the official accuser, you put yourself on trial. They will ask you why you lied. They will try to discredit you. You will be the hysterical, vengeful mother. Janelle will be the poor, misunderstood daughter. We are not fighting this in a court of law. Not yet. We are fighting this in the court of public opinion. He was right. I saw the wisdom in her cold, hard logic. My credibility was fragile. Janelle's was, on the surface, impeccable. A direct confrontation would be a disaster. So what is the goal? I asked. The goal, Rose said, her eyes gleaming with a fierce, brilliant light, is not to have you accuse her. The goal is to create a situation so toxic, so full of suspicion and scandal, that her own world turns on her. We don't need to push her off the pedestal. We just need to shake it until she falls off all by herself. We need to make her a liability to the people whose opinions she values. We need to make her so radioactive that her boss, her clients, and her rivals have no choice but to cut her loose. We are not aiming for a conviction. We are aiming for a professional execution. It was a brutal, ruthless, and beautiful strategy. It was a plan born of the unique, desperate genius that can only be cultivated in a place like prison. We were using the tools of the powerless, information, psychology, and a deep understanding of our opponent's weaknesses, to wage a war against the powerful. The library, with its scent of old paper and its profound, healing quiet, had become the most dangerous place in Philadelphia. From within its walls, two old women, invisible to the world, were plotting the downfall of a rising star. We had no weapons, no money, no power. We had only the truth and a very, very good plan. While Brenda and Mama Rose were mapping out their psychological warfare, David Chin was engaged in the grittier, ground-level work of a classic gumshoe investigation. He was a man possessed, fueled by a potent cocktail of righteous anger and the sheer intellectual thrill of the chase. He worked on Brenda's case in his off hours in the evenings and on weekends, a secret project that he guarded jealously from the crushing caseload of his day job. His first breakthrough came from the private investigator, Sal. The ex-cop was old school and methodical. He started with the car. It took him a week of patient, tedious work, of visiting dozens of small, independent body shops in the outer neighborhoods of Philadelphia, showing around a photo of Janelle's late-model sedan. He finally got a hit at a small, greasy, cash-only garage in South Philly, a place that specialized in quick, no-questions-asked repairs. The owner, a man with oil permanently etched into the lines of his hands, remembered the car. And he remembered the girl. "Yeah, a real piece of work, that one," he told Sal, wiping his hands on a rag. "Came in here in a panic. Had a big dent in the front right fender, cracked headlight. Said she'd hit a deer up in the Poconos. Paid cash. A lot of cash. Said she needed it done yesterday and she needed it quiet." Sal pressed him. "When was this?" The owner consulted a grimy, grease-stained ledger. "Let's see, here it is. November 14th of last year. It was 2 days after the hit and run. 2 days after Brenda had already confessed to the crime. It was the first piece of hard physical evidence that contradicted the official story. A receipt would have been better, but the owner's testimony, combined with the cash-only nature of the transaction, was a powerful piece of the puzzle. David's next target was the witness, Evan Prescott. Sal's sources tracked him down easily enough. He was no longer with OmniCorp. He had moved to a rival tech firm in San Francisco. David knew a direct confrontation would be a mistake. Prescott would be defensive, likely coached by Janelle or her company to stick to a certain story. So David decided to use a bit of subterfuge. He called Prescott at his new office, but he did not identify himself as Brenda's lawyer. He identified himself as an investigator for a fictional insurance company. "Mr. Prescott," he said, his voice a bland, bureaucratic drone, "I'm calling from the North American Risk Assessment Group. We're conducting a final review of a claim related to a minor traffic incident in Philadelphia last year. This is just a routine follow-up to close out the file. I just have a couple of quick questions." The lie worked. Prescott, thinking it was a meaningless bureaucratic chore, relaxed his guard. "Yeah, I remember that," he said. "Weird night. My host, Janelle, I think her name was, she was a little shaken up. Our records show that the driver of the vehicle was a Ms. Brenda Matthews," David said, his voice casual. "An older woman. Is that correct?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. A long, telling pause. Prescott stammered. Yeah, I think so. It was dark. It was raining. I didn't get a good look." The hesitation was all David needed. Prescott's memory was fuzzy, uncertain. He was not a confident eyewitness. He was a man who had been whisked away from the scene and had likely been told a story that he had passively accepted. His testimony, if it ever came to that, would be easily impeached. The final piece of the puzzle came from within Janelle's own world. David, using a bit of pretext and a lot of charm, managed to get in touch with a junior-level employee at Janelle's PR firm, a young man who was disgruntled and felt overlooked. David, again posing as a researcher for a trade publication doing a profile on rising stars in the PR world, began asking questions about Janelle. The young man, eager to dish some dirt on his successful rival, was a fountain of information. He talked about Janelle's ambition, her ruthlessness, and then he dropped a bombshell. The OmniCorp campaign, that was her masterpiece, the young man said, a note of bitter admiration in his voice. She sealed that deal the night of the awards gala. No, wait. Not the gala. It was before that. It was the night of the accident. David's heart began to pound. "The accident?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "Yeah, you know," the young man said, oblivious. "The one her mom got into. It was a whole thing. Janelle was supposed to be at this big dinner with the OmniCorp guys that night. But she had to cancel at the last minute because of the family emergency with her mom. She was so upset, thought she'd blown the whole deal. But it actually worked in her favor. The main client, some guy named Prescott, felt so bad for her for what she was going through with her mom, that he ended up championing her for the account. He basically handed her the contract on a silver platter out of sympathy. She turned a personal tragedy into a professional triumph. Genius, right? David felt a wave of nausea. It was worse than he had imagined. Janelle hadn't just covered up her crime. She hadn't just profited from it. She had actively, cynically, and brilliantly used her mother's false confession, the very act of love that was meant to save her, as a tool of emotional manipulation to advance her own career. She had weaponized her mother's sacrifice. He hung up the phone, his hands shaking with a cold, pure rage. He now had a motive. He had a timeline. He had evidence of a cover-up. He had a shaky eyewitness. He had the whole ugly, sordid story. He compiled everything into a single devastating file. The testimony from the body shop owner. The transcript of his call with Prescott. The notes from his conversation with Janelle's colleague. It was a portfolio of lies, a complete and total deconstruction of Janelle's carefully crafted public image. He picked up the phone and called the private visiting line at Greaterford. He left a message for Brenda Matthews. It was a single sentence. I have everything we need. It's time to load the gun. The war room in the prison library was about to launch its first and final assault. The day we launched the attack was a Tuesday. It was gray and overcast, a typical Pennsylvania autumn day. But inside the prison library the air was electric. David had visited the day before, a clandestine meeting where he had laid out the contents of his file for me and Rose. Seeing the evidence he had gathered, the tangible proof of Janelle's lies, was both sickening and profoundly validating. The story I had been living as a nightmare was now a collection of facts, a prosecutable case. But Rose was adamant. We would not go to the police. We would not go to the district attorney. That would be a declaration of war on their terms in their arena. Our strategy was more subtle, more insidious. It was an act of psychological and professional terrorism. We are not filing a motion, Rose had said, her eyes gleaming. We are issuing a press release. And so, David, following Rose's brilliant, ruthless strategy, had spent the weekend drafting the document. It was not a wild, accusatory screed. It was a masterpiece of professional subterfuge. It was written on the letterhead of a fictional entity he had created, the Philadelphia Media Integrity Project, a name that sounded both official and vaguely threatening. The document was titled, For Immediate Release, Questions Arise in Aftermath of Omnicorp PR Campaign. The press release did not make a single direct accusation. Instead, it asked a series of devastating, carefully worded questions. In light of Janelle Matthews' recent, celebrated success with the Omnicorp account, questions have emerged regarding the timeline of events leading to her firm securing the lucrative contract. Is it a conflict of interest for a PR professional to leverage a personal family tragedy, such as a parent's felony conviction, to garner sympathy and secure a business relationship with a client? Sources suggest that the key client decision-maker, Mr. Evan Prescott, was a witness in the very hit-and-run incident for which Ms. Matthews' mother, Brenda Matthews, is currently incarcerated. Why was a more thorough statement never taken from Mr. Prescott before he left the city? And why does his recollection of the driver of the vehicle seem to be uncertain? Furthermore, automotive repair logs from a South Philadelphia establishment indicate that Ms. Matthews' own vehicle underwent significant, undisclosed body work in the days immediately following the accident for which her mother confessed. This raises the question: if Brenda Matthews was the driver of the vehicle, why was her daughter's car in need of secret, cash-only repairs? The document was a work of art. It was a tapestry of innuendo, woven together with the hard threads of the facts David had uncovered. It didn't state that Janelle was guilty. It simply created a cloud of suspicion so thick and so toxic that no one could see through it. It was designed to destroy her not by proving her guilt, but by making her association with the truth a professional liability. The distribution plan was equally precise. At exactly 10 a.m. on that Tuesday morning, David Chin executed the attack. He didn't send it to the major newspapers or television stations. That would be too broad, too easy for Janelle to dismiss as a baseless smear. Instead, he sent it to a carefully curated list of recipients, the list that Rose and I had spent weeks compiling. The first email went to a single person, a well-known and notoriously vicious society gossip columnist for a popular Philadelphia magazine, a woman who delighted in the downfall of the city's elite. The second batch of emails went to the senior partners and managing directors of every single one of Janelle's rival PR firms in the city. He was not just informing the public, he was arming her competition. The third and most important email went directly to Mr. Davenport, the old-school, scandal-averse CEO of Janelle's own firm. And then we waited. In the prison library, the silence was deafening. Rose and I sat at our table pretending to read, but my heart was pounding a frantic, wild rhythm against my ribs. It felt like we had launched a missile and were now just waiting for the sound of the impact. We didn't have to wait long. The world of public relations, I have learned, is a small, incestuous, and incredibly gossipy fishbowl. The press release spread through that world like a digital firestorm. David called the prison's legal line in the late afternoon, leaving a coded message with a guard that he knew would get to me. Tell Ms. Matthews that the project proposal has been successfully distributed and has been met with significant interest. The first sign of impact came from the gossip columnist. By 3 p.m. she had published a scathing article on her blog under the headline, PR Princess or Criminal Cover-Up. The questions swirling around Janelle Matthews. The article reprinted our press release verbatim, adding its own layer of salacious speculation. It was brutal. It was vicious. And it was exactly what we had hoped for. The second impact was the professional fallout. By the end of the day, Janelle's rivals were already using the information, forwarding the press release to shared clients, whispering in the ears of journalists. The cloud of scandal was no longer just a cloud, it was a full-blown hurricane, and it was heading directly for Janelle. The final and most devastating blow was internal. Mr. Davenport, the man who valued his firm's reputation above all else, was now faced with an untenable situation. His star employee was not just in the news. She was the center of a burgeoning scandal that threatened to tarnish his entire agency. The press release had not accused Janelle of a crime. It had done something far worse. It had made her bad for business. It had made her toxic. The professional execution was underway. And I sat in the quiet of the prison library, 1,000 miles away from the chaos we had unleashed, and I felt the first true and glorious taste of justice. The reckoning was swift, brutal, and televised. The carefully constructed world that Janelle had built on my silence came crashing down with a speed and ferocity that was almost biblical. The scandal we had ignited was no longer a brushfire in the small world of Philadelphia PR. It was a full-blown city-wide inferno, and Janelle was standing at its epicenter. I watched it unfold from the dayroom of Greaterford, on the same television that had once displayed her greatest triumph. It was a surreal out-of-body experience. The local news channels, smelling blood in the water, picked up the story from the gossip blog. Suddenly, Janelle's beautiful professional headshot was on the screen, not next to a caption praising her success, but next to a headline that read, PR Executive Ian Hit and Run Controversy. The other inmates watched with a new kind of respect and a palpable sense of fear. I was no longer Mama Pierre, the fool. I was a quiet, gray-haired woman who had, from inside a prison cell, orchestrated the public immolation of her own child. I had become something they understood and respected. A survivor, a fighter, a woman who was not to be trifled with. They gave me a wide berth. They made sure I always had the best seat in front of the TV. The first domino to fall was her job. Mr. Davenport, her boss, acted with the swift, merciless precision of a man trying to save his own skin. His firm released a terse, public statement announcing that Janelle Matthews had been placed on indefinite administrative leave, pending an internal investigation. It was a corporate execution. She was fired. Her key card would be deactivated, her email account locked. The career she had sacrificed me for was gone, evaporated in less than 24 hours. The second domino was her client. Omnicorp, the tech giant whose account had been her crowning achievement, released their own statement. They were a company obsessed with their public image. The slightest whiff of scandal was anathema to them. Their statement was even colder than her firm's. They announced they were terminating their relationship with Janelle's agency, effective immediately, citing the need to avoid any and all appearance of impropriety. The client she had protected, the man she had charmed, had cut her loose without a second thought. Business, after all, was business. The third and most significant domino was the police. Pressured by the sudden, intense media scrutiny and the new, specific evidence that was now public knowledge, the body shop, the questions about the witness, The Philadelphia Police Department had no choice. To do nothing would be to admit their own incompetence, to admit they had been duped. They held a press conference. I watched, my heart a steady, slow drum in my chest, as a grim-faced police captain announced that in light of newly revealed information, the case of the hit-and-run accident involving Brenda Matthews was being officially reopened. The final, inevitable act came 2 days later. It was the lead story on the 6 o'clock news. The footage was shaky, shot by a news helicopter hovering over a street in Center City. It showed Janelle, my daughter, walking out of her luxury apartment building. She was not in a glittering gown. She was in jeans and a sweatshirt, her hair a mess, her face pale and puffy from crying. She was flanked by 2 stone-faced detectives. They walked her to an unmarked police car, their hands gently but firmly on her back. They put her in the back seat. They did not put her in handcuffs, not yet, but the meaning was clear. The news anchor's voiceover was somber. Sources tell us that Janelle Matthews is being taken in for questioning in connection with the hit-and-run accident for which her mother, Brenda, is currently serving a 3 to 5 year sentence. This is a developing story. I sat in the day room surrounded by the noise and chaos of the prison, and I watched my daughter be arrested on television. There was no triumph. There was no joy. There was only a vast, hollow, and deeply sorrowful sense of completion. The lie had finally run its course. The truth, which I had tried so hard to bury out of a misguided sense of love, had clawed its way out of the grave. Mama Rose sat down next to me. She didn't say anything. She just put her warm, strong hand on my shoulder. "It's done," I whispered, my eyes still fixed on the screen. "Yes," she said, her voice a low, gentle rumble. "It's done. You didn't put her there, Brenda. She put herself there the day she let you walk into that police station. All you did was turn on the lights so the world could see her. The reckoning was complete. Her world was in ashes. Her career was over. Her freedom was gone. She was about to become what I had been for the past year. A number, a case file, a body to be counted in the grim arithmetic of the state. I had not sought revenge. I had sought justice. And justice, I had learned, was a far colder, harder, and more devastating thing. My release from Graterford was the opposite of my entry. It was not a quiet, solitary act of self-sacrifice. It was a media event. The story of the mother who took the fall for her social climbing daughter had become a sensation, a modern-day morality play for the evening news. When the day finally came, after weeks of legal wrangling by David Chin, I walked out of the prison gates not as an anonymous, disgraced felon but as a symbol. David was there to meet me. He looked different than he had in the prison visiting room. The haunted, tired look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a quiet, confident pride. He had not just won a case. He had corrected a cosmic wrong. He had found his calling. The press was there, a chaotic scrum of reporters and television cameras, their microphones thrust towards my face. They shouted questions, their voices a confusing babble. "Brenda, how does it feel to be free? Do you forgive your daughter? What will you do now?" I held up a hand and a surprising silence fell over the crowd. I looked into the cameras, my face unsmiling, my voice clear and steady. "I am not a victim," I said. "And I am not a hero. I am a mother who made a terrible mistake, and I am a woman who has paid for it. My only statement is this. The truth is a debt that always gets paid one way or another. Thank you." And with that, David guided me through the crowd to his car and we drove away, leaving the circus behind. The world outside felt strange, loud, and overwhelmingly large. The colors seemed brighter, the air tasted sweeter. But I was not the same woman who had been taken from this world a year ago. That woman, the one who believed in the absolute, unquestioning power of maternal love, was gone forever. She had died in the cold, concrete confines of Graterford. The woman who emerged was different. She was harder, wiser, and infinitely more careful with her heart. Janelle, faced with the mountain of evidence against her, had confessed. She took a plea deal just as I had. She was sentenced to prison, a shorter sentence than mine, a testament to the power of a high-priced lawyer over a public defender. I have not seen her. I have not spoken to her. Her lawyer sent a letter, full of remorse and pleas for forgiveness. I did not reply. Forgiveness is a conversation, and I am no longer interested in talking to her. Perhaps one day I will be. But for now, my own healing is the only project that matters. I did not return to my old life. The house in West Oak Lane with its ghosts and its memories was sold. I used the money and the modest settlement I received from the state for my wrongful incarceration to start over. I bought a small, quiet condo in a different part of the city, a place with no history, a blank page on which to write a new story. But a life of quiet retirement was not for me. The fire that had been lit in me in that prison library, the fire that had been fanned by Mama Rose's wisdom and David's dedication, was not something that could be easily extinguished. I had found a new purpose. David Chin left the public defender's office. The notoriety for my case had brought him numerous offers from high-powered law firms, but he turned them all down. He too had been changed by this ordeal. Together he and I started a small non-profit advocacy group. We call it the Greaterford Project. Our mission is simple. We fight for the women who have been forgotten by the system, the women who, like me, have been silenced, manipulated, or have taken the fall for crimes they did not commit. David handles the legal work, his youthful idealism now tempered with a veteran's savvy. And I do what I have always done. I listen. I sit with these women in the same grim visiting rooms where David once sat with me, and I hear their stories. I am their advocate, their strategist, their proof that it is never too late to fight back. My legacy will not be the daughter I raised. It will not be the career I had. My legacy will be the Greaterford Project. It will be the women we help, the injustices we correct, the voices we amplify. I learned in prison that a story is the most powerful weapon we have. My name is Brenda Matthews. I am no longer a number. I am a storyteller. And my own story, the one I am writing now, is finally, truly about liberation.